He's a historian and professor of political science at Grove City College in Pennsylvania, and he's written a very timely new book, The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. Here to discuss it and the influence of socialism on our current political landscape is Dr. Paul Kengor. Paul, thanks for being here. You have said that this book badly needed to be written. Why, and why now?
Well, Raymond, I mean, I've never seen a time in American history when so many people are praising socialism and even communism. I mean, the numbers are really kind of shocking. It was bad enough to see for a while, right? Those Gallup poll numbers where they would ask millennials or Americans generally, do you prefer socialism or capitalism, right? It's kind of, a little this way, then it gets even, then it gets suddenly socialism, 46%, capitalism, 44%. But now you're even finding high numbers of young people and people across the board that are even saying positive things about Marxism. And one of the things you see in the polls, too, in the numbers, well, not in all the polls, but those that ask, is if there's any kind of ray of hope or silver lining in this, Raymond, is when they ask people, well, how do you define Marxism, communism? They'll say, well, it's about people sharing, right? It's about people being kind to one another. And what I mean by a ray of hope in that is it's clear they don't know what it is. So if folks like me and you and EWTN, I mean, if we can educate people that, the Communist Manifesto says the entire communist theory may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property, right? Quote, abolition of the family, exclamation mark. Even the most radical flare up of this infamous proposal of the communists. That's direct language from the manifesto. If people would learn this stuff, then maybe they stop and say, well, gee, I don't think I really want to abolish private property. I don't think I want to abolish my right of inheritance, right, of all of my parents' money. So if we could just educate people, there might be a window here, an opportunity to change things. And man, when they learn about, literally the Devil and Karl Marx, some of the stuff that Marx wrote, some of his poetry, some of this kind of dark side of Marx's personal life, I'll tell you, they ain't going to like what they see there either.
Yeah, well, the heart of your book is about Marx's vicious attack on religion. He also had a fascination of sorts with the devil, and you focus attention on his writings, particularly the poetry and his prose. On religion, Marx famously wrote, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. And in a piece of poetry, as you referenced, the Pale Maiden, Marx writes, thus heaven I forfeited, I know it full well, my soul once true to God is chosen for hell. Now, you argue that Marxism is very much the fruit of Marx's ideas. And those who try to separate the man from the ideology miss the point. Why? Why do you think they try to make that separation?
Yeah, because I mean, really, at its basis, it's a spiritual battle. Right? I mean, this is, to quote Pope Benedict XVI, Marxists envisioned this new Jerusalem on earth, this atheistic utopia. They really did believe that man lives on bread alone. Isn't it ironic that Jesus tells the tempter, Satan, man does not live on bread alone. But the Marxists wanted this strictly material world.
Marxism was rejected by the Catholic leadership early on. However, it did gain a foothold in parts of the church as communism spread during the 20th century, certainly in liberation theology. Do you see the effects of Marxism in the church today?
Well, yeah, I think you could say that. And look, the church opposed this from the very beginning, Raymond. I mean, the Communist Manifesto was published in 1848. The first papal encyclical opposing communism was called Qui Pluribus by Pope Pius IX in 1846, 2 years before the Communist Manifesto was even published. Then came encyclical after encyclical, Leo XIII, Pius X, Pius XI, Pius XII. Pius XI, Pius XII, Divini Redemptoris, the encyclical in the 1930s, referred to communism as a satanic scourge orchestrated by the sons of darkness. I talk in the book at length about the claims of Bella Dodd. And Bella Dodd is the one who indeed seems to have said, and Alice von Hildebrand, among others, can testify to this, that she, as a communist organizer for the Communist Party in the 1930s, she began organizing teachers, and she claimed that in the 1930s she helped place, quote, over 1,000 communist men, unquote, in Catholic seminaries. Now, I was not able to confirm that or prove that in the book, but she did seem to say that. And I walked through the numbers, Raymond. Was that feasible? I mean, it sounds like just a gigantic number, right? 1,000 communist men in seminaries. Well, at the time, I mean, we're looking at 30,000 and then upward into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, 60,000 men in Catholic seminaries, priests at the time. And Bella Dodd pulled off numbers like that with the teachers union merely in the state of New York. So it's quite feasible. It's quite possible that that happened. And if it did happen, at least to some extent, it probably, helps to explain. Yeah, I think, look, it's hard to say A led to B, led to C, but you do see elements like liberation theology in the 1960s and 1970s. And I think it's probably not completely unrelated.
Polls have revealed, and you mentioned this earlier, that many young American voters favor socialism over capitalism. 70% of millennials would consider voting for a socialist candidate. What has given rise to the socialism chic, and why are we seeing more and more of it explicitly voiced in American politics?
Well, in American politics and also in the American Catholic Church, Raymond, look, not to pick on them, but America Magazine, the Jesuit magazine, last summer of 2019, actually published a piece called The Catholic Case for Communism. The Catholic Case for Communism. And I can tell you, I mean, you go back to like Pius XII's 1949 papal decree on communism, that might well have gotten you excommunicated
right.
at one point in the Catholic Church. I quote Dorothy Day's The Catholic Worker in the 1930s saying, no, you cannot be a Catholic and a communist, right? Yeah, that's Dorothy Day. Quadragesimo Anno in the 1930s, right, by Pope Pius XI. One cannot be at the same time a true Catholic and a socialist. The two are incompatible. So, but unfortunately, this has happened. It's crept into American culture, American society, American politics, and the church. And I think the answer, Raymond, is really education, education, education. We have miseducated since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Look, take someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's Catholic, right, or claims to be Catholic. And I don't mean that as a judgmental statement. I don't know how Catholic she really is. I don't know what church she belongs to. But she was recently noted by the National Catholic Reporter. They called her the future of the Catholic Church. She was 4 weeks old when the Berlin Wall fell. Okay, 4 weeks old. And she represents a generation that's gone through our public schools and our universities who didn't learn any of this stuff that you and I are talking about today, about the horrors of communism.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And AOC is the future of the Catholic Church, like I'm the future of Mormonism, okay? In a recent article, American Spectator, you point out that Marxist ideology is even being promoted by Teen Vogue. Now, that magazine over the summer, they released a piece on Twitter advocating the abolition of police, okay? And they tweeted the following: while we're working to abolish the police, we must also work to dismantle what the police were put here to protect: property. Now, this sounds right out of the Marxist handbook. How has Marxism become so deeply embedded in the popular culture, and why?
Yeah, and what's further outrageous about this, Raymond, is that here we are in this cancel culture today, right? Where, I mean, one bad statement or questionable statement that one figure made somewhere in the past, I mean, they want to rename John Wayne Airport. I'm a Reagan scholar. I've written about this. There was a remark that Reagan made to Richard Nixon in a private phone conversation in 1972 that has people wanting to rename Reagan National Airport. Well, if you look at what Karl Marx said, all right, This guy was a racist. He was anti-Semitic. He was absolutely sexist. He had a terrible family life. Two of Marx's daughters, Raymond, committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands. All right, I mean that's unusual. That's unusual. He impregnated the family nursemaid. Her name was Lenchen. Didn't pay her a penny. Denied that the child was his when the child was born. Never paid the child a penny. Is on Jews. The anti-Semitic statements from this guy who was an ethnic Jew. He came from a long family of rabbis. Said the Israelite faith is repulsive to me. Said what is the worldly God of what is the bill of exchange of the Jew? Money. Really highly insulting statements about Jews. Use the N-word all the time. Why are we canceling Karl Marx? Right? This is kind of like Margaret Sanger, who speaks to the Silver Lake, New Jersey women's chapter of the KKK in May 1926, writes about it in her memoirs, pages 366 and 367. I know the page numbers because we read it in my class every year. And there are still things named for Margaret Sanger. She hasn't been canceled. You have professors with busts of Karl Marx in their offices. Marx gets away with this. Instead, we're tearing down statues of Washington, Jefferson, Ulysses S. Grant, Junipero Serra, St. Louis. So the hypocrisy is really disturbing. And again, it comes down to, I think, this issue of education. It's what our kids are being taught, and they're not being taught. And in the case of Marx and Marxism, they're being taught to prefer it, to like it, not to condemn it.
Paul, I only have 30 seconds. I want to read this to you and get your reaction. You write, both classical Marxists and cultural Marxists see history as a series of struggles that divide the world into hostile, antagonistic groups of oppressors and the oppressed. Both seek out victim groups as the anointed group that will also serve as society's redeemer group. The victim group becomes the agent for emancipation in ushering in the new and better world. Who is that victim group today, or the victim group du jour, and how should we see it in the context of Marxism here in America?
It's constantly evolving, Raymond. It's constantly changing. If you go to the websites of Communist Party USA or People's World, which is the successor to the Daily Worker, and unfortunately this is part of what I do, right? It's an occupational hazard of the work that I do. They use an interesting phrase. They say they are seeking cultural workers. They actually use that term at the About section of People's World. In a way, Raymond, they've given up on the factory floor, right? They know that the West Virginia coal miner is going to vote for Trump, right? They've given up on the mill worker, the steel worker, the coal miner. They use at People's World the acronym LGBTQIA+. They're looking for what they call cultural workers. So it's this constant casting about for new victim groups that they could use to fulfill the kind of Marxist vision of fundamentally transforming the Judeo-Christian order.
Yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for the time. The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration by Paul Kengor is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond. God bless.